Christian White started a program called the One Day at a Time Dad, because that's exactly what he was when he became the primary caregiver for his 11-year-old son, who was on the autism spectrum. White needed practical advice and support. Single fatherhood is hard for any man, let alone one who spent the first 9 years of his son's life in prison. But it was White's intense focus on learning to be the father that he never had that has propelled him forward. Christian White knows where to hang his flyers so active gang members will see them. Unadorned, each one poses a single question White believes should be considered by a young man running the streets who is also a father. White wishes that someone had shown him the connection between his anger and the violence that he inflicted on his community. Now that he understands it, White wants to keep others from repeating his mistakes. Fatherhood is his vehicle. What are you trying to accomplish through your work?
Healing. If I had to sum it up in one word, healing. And that healing is full spectrum.
White has worked hard to heal himself from a childhood of trauma. He was abandoned by his birth mother and endured an emotionally abusive father. White was also sexually abused repeatedly. 6 months before turning 14, White went to live with his uncle and aunt, Pastors Ray and Gloria White Hammond, founders of the Bethel AME Church in Jamaica Plain.
How would you describe Christian at age 14?
When he came, what was clear is that he was extremely bright and really troubled. He was angry.
He was just withdrawn. He wasn't going to reach out and build relationships when those relationships could end very quickly and suddenly for him.
You could get glimpses of a softness and a desperation to be loved.
During this 6-month period, the Hammonds hoped that by providing love, stability, and a model of cohesive family life, their nephew would stay with them permanently. But when the trial period was over, White announced that he wanted to be placed in the foster care system. It was a big blow for the Hammonds.
Very afraid for him and wanted desperately to try to figure out a way to have him stay.
I wasn't completely surprised. This must be really scary for him, becoming that attached to people and why would I do that? And then set myself up to be disappointed or set myself up for that relationship to fail.
White's journey to this moment in time passed through the darkest places of the mind and body. Unable to receive the Hammonds' love, White made his way to the violent streets of Boston, where he found kinship among other angry and broken young men and women, acting out their pain on each other. In the following 13 years, White was in and out of the criminal justice system and nearly died from gunshot when he was 16. At age 27, Christian White was convicted of illegal gun possession and sentenced to 10 years in prison.
What was that like?
For the first few years, it was rough. But then it became easier because you can't focus on the outside. And that means people, places, and things.
In addition to imposing long-term isolation, the prison walls put something else of great value out of White's reach. 6 months into his prison term, his son Christian was born.
Those times you did get to see him, what was that like for you?
You have to make it through the time. And if that means forgetting about your child, then you better damn well do that. Because you'll go crazy wondering what's going on. And you'll go crazy wondering what's going on. And I refuse to be crazy. I wanted to come out and be productive.
In prison, White saw his son a handful of times. At the last visit, young Christian was 2 years old. When White was released, his son was 9.
So when you came out and saw your son for the first time outside of prison, what was that like?
One of my friends, he took a picture, so there's a picture of us hugging for that after all that time. And I always look at it, and it's the most uncomfortable hug that both of us are giving and experiencing. I'm just like, do you know who I am? And he's like, yeah, you're my dad. Yo, oh man.
Young Christian has his own memories of that day.
Do you remember meeting him in person for the first time? Can you tell me about that?
Well, it was like in this building. It was in Boston, and like I was waiting for him with my family, and I just saw him come through the door, and I hugged him.
How'd that feel?
It felt good, but it kind of felt weird because I never saw him.
I think what made me know that I was a dad was when he introduced me to somebody and he said, "This is my dad." And I don't know, there's just certain moments with him where he just does something and it reminds me that I'm doing exactly the right thing.
In time, young Christian looked to his dad for companionship and affection. One night, the boy was visiting when a snowstorm descended, forcing an unplanned sleepover. The change in plans made young Christian very anxious. As his father calmed him with breathing techniques, White discovered that his son was most worried about wetting the bed, which indeed he did. It became a powerful parenting moment for White.
I'm like, Christian, it's a wet spot. That's all it is. That's all this is a wet spot. This does not determine my love for you.
White recognized his son's fear of abandonment, and in that moment owned his part in that deep-seated insecurity. White is very honest in telling his son that prison is what kept him away for his son's first 9 years of life.
I explained unequivocally, me not being there was my decision. I made choices. I should have valued my life more, your coming life more, but I didn't, and I paid for that, and you paid for that. And everything that you took on because of that is 100% because of me. So I owe you.
White was given the chance to repay his debt to his son. Young Christian's mother, overwhelmed by the care of young Christian and his half-siblings, asked White to become the primary caregiver. She recognized that her son needed his father. White, in search of practical advice and support, created this Facebook page called The One Day at a Time Dad. Immediately, people began to respond with guidance and advice about what he'd need to know and do.
I had never set a doctor's appointment, never. Being a secondary parent is the easiest thing in the world to be. It's the easiest thing in the world to be. Now I'm going to IEP meetings. I never had to advocate for my son or, I had to set up a physical. I didn't know he couldn't go to school if he didn't get a physical. I literally did not know none of these things. There's so many steps that as men, specifically, especially in Massachusetts, we're just never taught. We find out once we're in court, in probate court, in prison, and I want to stem the flow before and after. I want to get guys to not go to prison, and if they're coming home from prison, what are the messages that they're receiving, especially around fatherhood?
What began as that Facebook page has evolved. Though his materials are more formal, his question is the same. If you go to jail, will the gang raise your child? Additionally, as part of his Listening to Learn series, White interviews community members impacted by violence, as well as those who have perpetrated the violence. White says all his work flows right from his relationship with his son.
I want to help lead other men along the same journey that I did, which is going back, deconstructing those values or breaking them down, and reconstructing them with the choice of how much you're worth. I had to make myself relevant to myself first by recognizing my worth and then transferring that into my child and then transferring that into the community.